Is the Delta variant as contagious as the chickenpox? Does this even matter? I don't think it does. I'm going to talk about why practically actually that question does not matter. Some considerations around the data of the different variants of this virus, particularly in comparison to the original strain, the alpha, and what we can essentially acknowledge and do about it in light of this new evidence claimed by the CDC and other bodies and universities. So, let's begin. This is not about feelings or emotion. This is just about data. I'm just a scientist trying to summarize the data in the most unbiased, unemotional way possible. That's what I've done with many of my videos on this topic and really everything I do and put out to the world. But first of all, we need to acknowledge everybody's like, oh, new variants come about. What are we going to do? Well, there's multiple variants. There's been multiple variants. We have the beta, the gamma, the epsilon, the lota, and now the delta. And now even one that I'll talk about briefly maybe later, the lambda variant in South America. And each variant poses two main distinguishing factors. One, its contagibility, its transmissibility from host to host, which is represented by a value called the R0 or R0, which many of you may have been familiar with at this point, and the severity to which it affects the host. Okay, what we see, we're getting this data from a leaked internal document by the CDC that was put out by NPR and some other organizations. What you see, and you can download the PowerPoint and you can see this information that they hadn't made public yet because they acknowledged that it's still some of it is still preliminary data and subject to change. But what we noticed is that what we're seeing now is this Delta variant is multitudes more spreadable than the Alpha variant. How much more though? What does that mean? So the R0 for the Alpha variants is about 1.2 to 3. It depends. It's in a range. It's not a fixed number. We need to acknowledge number one. So that means for every, let's put the median about 2, for every 2 people that get it, for every person that gets it, they spread it to 2 people, okay? When there's no intervention. So just 2 times 2 times 2. Let's give an actual example of what that means. So let's say there are 3 rounds of, now let's talk about the Delta variant. Let's say there are 3 rounds of transmission for the Delta variant at an R0 of 7. Okay, that's pretty high. It's higher than the Alpha. Well, this would mean cases would rise from round to round. How many cases would there be? Well, after 3 rounds of transmission, 7 times 7 times 7. That's 343. Versus, let's compare it to the Alpha variant, where we have an R0 of maybe around 3 at the top end. So if we do an R0 of 3, cases would rise after 3 transmission levels by 27, because we get 3 times 3 times 3. Now, it's not as clear-cut as this. In the real world, we see variability among the R0. There are so many things that can influence the R0 and spreadability of a contagious virus. However, we have to operate on averages. We have to operate on confidence intervals here. And you can see from the CDC internally document that is linked, there's a range here, guys. Of course there's a range. There's a range here that it goes somewhere between 5 from an R0 all the way up to around 9. Now, the chickenpox that we've known about for forever, right? We know that sits at around-ish a 10, 9, 8-ish, okay? R0. Now, the claim is that the CDC have overestimated the spreadability and the R0 of the Delta variant and underestimated the spreadability of the chickenpox. Okay, and let's say they have, and there's some. I put this in my Instagram post. You can kind of see more of the summary of this video there if you want to see it in a written form in 1 minute. They say this because there's preliminary data and the data was taken from a small sample size. There's some limitations maybe in the data that they took. Okay, cool. Let's say that even if that is true, I don't think it matters, right? Even if the chickenpox is more contagious than COVID, as some of the evidence was shown that NPR put out this really nice graphic that showed evidence from the Lancet and different universities and John Hopkins, for example, and they summarized where the R0 sits. And you can see on the screen here, I'm looking at it in front of me, we see the Delta strain around 7 people as an R0. So for every person that gets it, they spread it to about 7 people. The chickenpox being around 10. Let's say that's even accurate. It doesn't matter because it's not about comparing it to other contagious viruses like the chickenpox. It's about comparing it to what we're dealing with now, the current health epidemic, and that is comparing the alpha variant, which is around an R0 of 2 to 3-ish, to this, which is essentially on average around more than double the spreadability. So we need to consider this when we talk about a population-based strategies that we need to in place in order to control this, because the reality is the Delta variant appears more transmissible. Transmissible. It's going to affect you whether we like it or not. Whether you like it or not, we will have to engage with this in some reality. So what we do with that now is we have to acknowledge that a state can either choose to accept this, or a state can essentially live with it, or they attempt to extinguish it. However, it becomes less and less probable, more and more difficult, and or take longer to extinguish a virus and get it under an R0 of 1, which is the goal, as a virus becomes more and more easily to spread. Particularly if it has an R0 of 7, 8, 9, 10, somewhere in this range, particularly compared to how difficult it's already been to extinguish the alpha variant, the beta variant. How much more difficult could it be to extinguish or to manage and minimize and ameliorate the Delta variant and future variants that will come along? Because we also have to acknowledge that future variants will come along because that's the nature of viruses, is that they replicate, and when they replicate going from person to person, some mutations will be rendered inert and ineffective and not present with characteristics that are more deadly or more contagious, but some every now and again will. And we see that particularly when we talk about on such a large scale that we're operating now, where hundreds of millions of people are interacting with this virus and these vaccines. Now we're going to see naturally mutations from that virus. So what can we kind of summarize from this? We can summarize that, yes, it appears the Delta variant sits between this confidence interval of about 5 to 9-ish on an R0 spreadability. It seems to be more than double in its ability to be infectious. And that can be a problem. That can be harder to now control. Also from the CDC document, which from what I'm seeing from the data is that they're just trying to summarize a lot of the data that they're putting out, that has been put out there and done. We see that the Delta variant may be associated with a higher viral load and duration of shedding. And so what we see is the Delta variant is associated with a longer duration of, they call it the cycle threshold. The cycle threshold is basically a measurement of the viral load. How much of the virus are you shedding? Because at different stages of having the virus, you have different levels of transmissibility onto another person. Some stages you're very minimally there's very low viral load, right? Particularly people asymptomatic, particularly in the early stages, very low viral load, but in the height of the symptoms, high viral load, okay? So what we see is that there's this longer duration of viral load for the Delta variant. The median, the middle range, is about 18 days versus the ancestral original strains, such as the alpha variant being 13 days. I'll put a screenshot up on from that document with citations, of course. So we're seeing about 18 to 13. Well, this makes it even more difficult because if someone's going to have a permissible amount of virus in their system that is transmissible, well, the implication to this is, okay, it might take longer to manage. You might need to, countries and states may justify this in accordingly to extend restrictions. Okay, we have to understand people get so frustrated and tiresome naturally of all of these various restrictions across the world, right? I'm in one of the states that has some of the harshest restrictions, and it is tiresome and challenging as it can be. You can put yourself in the shoes of some of these health officials and see, oh, maybe that's where they're getting some of their justifications from, okay? It doesn't make it always right, moral, or ethical, but at least we can start to understand what we're dealing with here from at least a clear data perspective. I'm not saying people don't muddle with data and preliminary data and unpeer reviewed data can be wrought with error. It certainly can, but we need to see where the totality of the evidence is pointing. And it appears, based on the empirical, anecdotal, hospital, epidemiological, and some of this clinical data, that is pointing in the direction that Delta variant is more infectious, has a higher viral load, the vaccine is less efficacious against it, and it could be more deadly in its ability to kill its host or to implicate a higher severity and damage from the organism, okay? So we see some epidemiological data here that the Delta variant may cause more severe disease than Alpha or ancestral strains. We see in Canada, Singapore, and Scotland rates of hospitalization being higher, ICU admission being higher in comparison to ancestral strains. That's something to consider in the totality of the evidence. And the vaccine dose effectiveness appears to be a bit mixed. It seems to be pretty similar from Alpha to Delta among different populations from England, Scotland, Canada, and Israel. I'll put up on the screen here. Won't need to dissect everything here. Israel seems to be the most less resilient to the vaccine effectiveness against the Delta strain. However, Canada has some more similar. It's the vaccine seems to be doing a similar job from these different strains. England and Scotland seem to be indicating a bit less efficacy for this Delta strain for these vaccines. The Pfizer vaccine, that is, 2 doses, that is. So it seems to be trending that the vaccine is less efficacious for the Delta. But some countries like Canada reporting that maybe it's quite similar. It just shows that there's a lot of variables in this, and that you should take your population data for your country and the totality of the data from other countries into consideration, which you may want to err on the side of caution given higher transmissibility and current vaccine coverage, that the Delta variant may be appears to be a more highly contagious, likely more severe variant that we would need to consider in the management from a population, systemic, and individual based livelihood and just day-to-day considerations that we should make to manage this virus. So that's it, guys. I hope that video didn't make you too emotional. I hope I was able to provide some nice summary of some of the recent claims being made and a bit of the confusing, contradictory information, and that this claim of worse or better than chickenpox is really irrelevant in the scheme of its relative transmissibility and severity. Hope you enjoyed. I've got plenty more videos on this topic on Strength of Saad, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. If you guys want to see more, you can subscribe, follow there. Otherwise, let me know what you disagreed with, what you loved, what you liked, what you disliked. Put it all below. See you guys in the next one.